I was a senior in high school when Final Fantasy VII came out. I still remember seeing the commercials for this, and I just had to play this game. Looking back at those old ads, I must not have paid attention to what they were saying because they gave away critical plot points in the ad. What an oblivious youth I was. When I finally sat down to play, boy was I surprised. This was a turn-based RPG which I had never played before. At first, I was underwhelmed, but as I played, I really got into the story, and the combat expanded, allowing more options. The story was deeper than any game I had played at the time. The Sector 7 plate falling was unbelievable to me. I never played a game where you did everything right and the story still had you fail. I played the game in a very linear way. I had to use a ton of HP materia to survive the final battle because I knew nothing about grinding to level up my characters. Final Fantasy VII led to RPGs being my favorite genre of video game, and for the longest time, Final Fantasy VII was the GOAT for me. So when Square Enix announced they were remaking this story, there were definitely big expectations set in my mind for this. I feel the first game remake was off to a solid start by keeping very true to the spirit of 7 while also adding some new twists that can make for some interesting new elements. The deeper look at the side characters so you feel the impact when they died at the plate falling, as well as a twist that had Cloud and the gang defying fate, which seemed to potentially alter the story. The combat was dynamic, and I was very curious to see how Rebirth was going to move the story forward. Rebirth. Where to begin? The visuals are beautiful to look at in this game, as well as seamless transitions into cutscenes from normal gameplay. Now, as beautiful as this game is, the graphics for this huge world have some poppin' in the backgrounds and textures from time to time, but it never really distracted me that much. The world is broken up into large enough zones for you to explore, so you don't feel like you're in a small sandbox. The combat for this seems to have expanded and managed to make things more dynamic than the previous entry. The introduction of the team-up moves made this a lot of fun and made me want to really mix up my party to see all the combinations you could do. Now, there are segments where you can't choose your party members, and sometimes you're stuck in one-on-one battles. I breezed through most of the combat without blocking for, as long as I had a full party. But in the one-on-one sections, it is critical that you have great defense because there's little margin for error. There is a good amount of side quests in this game, and they seem to change them up so they never really get that boring, and you have some interesting story elements for some of them. Some of the side quests are tied to mini-games, and man does this game have mini-games. I'm okay with some mini-games, but this had way too many for my liking. My playtime was probably increased about another 20 hours because of all the mini-games. Now, this could be a me problem because my reaction time is not that great with these read and react games, so that might just be for me. Some of the mini-games were easy enough to play, but others took me hours to master, and some frustrated me to the point where I felt like throwing my controller across the room. I played these mostly because I wanted to complete all the side quests, so I had to get good at these mini games. Most of the English voice acting is great, but there are a few times where a line is delivered that should have more emotion or impact behind it, but instead it's flat. Cloud is robotic a lot of the time, but I think that may be an intentional choice because he's supposed to be emotionally distant from everyone for the most part, and it's through building his relationship with the other party members that break down his walls. Overall though, voice actors do a great job in this. Now, the most important element of any Final Fantasy game is the story. And I'll break this into two parts, the elements tied to the original story and the new additions to the story. Story again follows fairly closely to the original Final Fantasy VII. You get a lot of the same story beats. What this game does better than the original is it gives you a lot of optional conversations to build the relationships with your companions and gives you more detail of each character, letting you feel closer to them. You feel the pain of each character's backstory. In some cases, the story gives you some additional perspective of what happened. Like with Remake, Rebirth side characters have bonding moments with the main characters, and you feel more attached to them because of it. These stories are in the side missions, so would not skip them if you can help it. There are times where you see Cloud losing his grip or even his despair seeing what is happening to the other former soldiers and the possibility that could eventually be him. There are some new elements like Wutai declaring war on Shinra and some added boss battles for more action. Now I like most of these new battles, but I am a little mixed on the encounters at the end of the game, and I'll go into that a little more later. The new story elements were created because of Cloud and Company defying fate from Remake, which left me a bit confused, and I believe I understood most of it, but I am unclear of how they're going to proceed with this. This will tie into the mixed bag in the final showdown I'll talk about later. Before I go into those spoilers, let me say this. Overall, this was a mostly positive experience. I would recommend it, but it will take a significant amount to get through. My playtime was over 150 hours, but I did do all the side missions. I enjoyed the story for the most part, and I feel so far this is a worthy retelling of the story. But a lot of it relies on them sticking the landing on the final game. Now I'm going to get into some spoilers, so I suggest stopping the video here if you don't want the ending ruined for you. Remake's ending evidently fractured the timeline and created a bunch of offshoots of what the future could hold or other timelines or dimensions. Usually at the beginning of each chapter, you see a scene with Zack who's tending to Cloud and Aerith who are unconscious. You do not find out this is an offshoot dimension until the end, so these parts are puzzling to watch them unfold. There are times where Aerith and Cloud see what's going on in the other world, and eventually they wind up there for a brief moment. Now, this was confusing because Aerith seemed to be the same person from Cloud's original world, but later you find out Cloud is, let's call it Zack's dimension, and Cloud is actually unconscious in his own dimension, but Aerith is still conscious and engaging with everyone in that same dimension that Cloud's originally from. It seems like the ancients may be able to consciously slide through these dimensions unlike everyone else, and using this slide ability, another version of Aerith gives Cloud holy materia, which was originally drained from the original Aerith when they defied fate at the end of Remake. Cloud is then able to give this materia to his world's Aerith before she has her fateful encounter with Sephiroth. Now, I'm unsure of how things will change because of them defying fate in Remake, but things seem to be on rails for the most part, matching the original story, but the whispers from the first game seem to be under Sephiroth's control now. So this current confusing setup means the ending of the third game will determine if this retelling is truly successful. Now, the final boss fights are where you go against multiple versions of Jenova and Sephiroth, and the members you can fight with are swapped a lot here. The overall spectacle is fun and entertaining, but I am uncertain about it being a good choice to fight Sephiroth at the end of each game. I mean, if you keep beating him, it takes away from the thrill of the final climax when you have already defeated him several times before. In fact, they seem to have used one version of Sephiroth that's in the original Final Fantasy VII that's at the end of the game as one of the bosses in one of the fights. Now, if you're watching at this point, you probably already know Sephiroth kills Aerith. I assume she had already passed away because you do not use her in any of these final boss fights. Until the grand finale, she steps out revealing herself and teams up with Cloud. Now, I was always an Aerith guy when it came to Final Fantasy VII, and I thought there might be a slight chance that she could survive, but she still dies, which I was fine with, but her death's impact was lacking. Leading up to the ancient city, I was probably sadder because of my knowledge of what was about to happen than what was being set up. That may be an impossible emotion to replicate because my knowledge of the original prevents me from being surprised when that big moment happens, but being able to fight one more time with her was still enjoyable since I almost always had her in my party, and I'll need to figure out who I'm going to roll with in that final game to take her spot. Cloud still being able to see and talk to Aerith though, even after she's dead, took away a lot of the sting. The emotion is really left to the rest of the party and is mostly represented through Tifa because they made Tifa and Aerith very close in this game. For me, Cloud being able to see her was a bad thing. Knowing Cloud's pain of seeing her go with no final goodbye was a big part of the original. I think this change took away a strong emotional component of what happened. It's not enough to sour the new iteration of Final Fantasy VII, but it does leave me a little disappointed. That being said, I still cannot wait to play the finale of this trilogy, and I am hopeful for an interesting ending. I think I've talked long enough. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Leave me a message in the comments and we can discuss this. Well, for now, take care.